All right, so get ready, everybody. Today we are diving deep into the world of Franz Kafka's The Trial. And, you guys sent over some really thought-provoking excerpts, and I think together we can kind of unpack like what makes this novel so compelling and unnerving, I think is a good word for it. It's one of those stories that just like gets under your skin and makes you question, well, pretty much everything.
Yeah, it's really, I think the brilliance of Kafka is how he takes something that seems so utterly ordinary and mundane, like the arrest of a man, named Joseph K., and how he just warps that into this chilling reflection, really, I think, of like societal anxieties.
Absolutely. I mean, we have Joseph K., this respectable bank clerk, just like you said. He's suddenly arrested one morning. And the crime, it's never actually specified. And Kafka, he just drops us right into this unsettling world right from the beginning where the rules are completely unclear. And even the accusation, it remains like shrouded in this total mystery. What do you think? Like, what is Kafka trying to achieve, with his deliberate lack of information?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with, it immediately creates this sense of unease, of powerlessness, right? It taps into this almost primal fear that I think we all have of, being judged and accused without even knowing why. It's like being lost in, one of those like bureaucratic mazes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where the exit is always just out of reach, like you can never quite get there.
It's like a nightmare that you can't wake up from, almost.
Exactly, yeah.
And that feeling that you're talking about, this unease, I mean, it's amplified so much in the arrest scene itself, I mean, Kay's reaction, I think, is totally understandable. He's confused. He's defiant. He wants to see the warrant. He demands to know who are these officers even, and it's almost as if he's trying to like laugh it off, almost find some like little shred of normalcy, I guess, in the situation, which is, just totally absurd.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But the thing is, though, the arresting officers, they're anything but normal, right? They're so evasive, and they seem more fixated, I think, on Kay's clothes than on his actual like rights as a person. I mean, they even offer him breakfast almost like in this really friendly way, But then they won't let his landlady, Mrs. Grubach, enter the room, and all these seemingly trivial like little details, they just contribute to this growing sense that something is like deeply unsettlingly wrong,
Yeah.
But the actual source of that wrongness, it just remains like totally elusive.
It's like he's stumbled into this like nightmare where logic has been totally suspended.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that kind of brings us, I think, to the legal system that Kay finds himself battling, throughout the novel. I mean, he's trying to understand it. He goes to his first hearing, and it's in this cramped attic courtroom, and he delivers a speech, even like proclaiming his innocence. But the whole process, it's just like shrouded in this obscurity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not accidental, right? I mean, the chaotic and labyrinthine nature of the court, it's by design. It's meant to be that way. The dilapidated building, the strange procedures, the officials who are just totally unhelpful. I mean, they all contribute to this feeling that Kay has, and that I think we as readers have as well, of being trapped, in this system that's beyond comprehension, that's beyond escape almost.
It's like the law itself, it's like it's become this vast shadowy entity that's operating on a logic entirely its own, it's not the logic that we're used to in the real world at least.
Right, yeah.
And even the smallest details, like the washerwoman, right, who distracts the court by simply being present during the examining magistrate's, questioning of Kay. I mean, it just highlights how arbitrary and unpredictable this whole system is.
Yeah, and that scene with the washerwoman, it's crucial, I think, because it reveals that power within this legal system. It's not necessarily about, logic or justice, right? It's about these subtle, these capricious forces that can just derail the proceedings at any given moment. It's like Kay's fate is essentially at the whim of something he can neither understand nor control.
Right. It's like it's totally outside his grasp.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what happens then, when Kay tries to fight back, when he tries to find some sense of control, I guess, within this totally incomprehensible system, he reaches out for help, first to his uncle, then to this lawyer named Hull. But these encounters, they just seem to only deepen the mystery.
Yeah, well, I think the uncle, he kind of represents those traditional values, right, of respectability, of social standing,
Hmm.
the kind of values that are suddenly threatened by this arrest, and the uncle is more worried about the family name, I think, than Kay's actual well-being.
Yeah, it's almost like he can't even process like what's actually happening to Kay. He's just worried about the optics of it all, you know?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and it's his uncle actually who insists that Kay seeks out legal counsel, right? And that's how he ends up meeting Hold. But Hold himself, he presents himself, as Kay's advocate, but there's this constant like air of ambiguity about him, Like he warns Kay about the court's power, the very slim chances of winning. It's almost as if he's simultaneously offering Kay hope and then crushing it, like all in the same breath.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, Hold embodies the contradictions, really,
Yeah.
of the system itself. I mean, is he genuinely trying to help Kay, or is he just another, cog in this oppressive machine? It's a question that Kafka deliberately leaves, I think, hanging in the air.
Right. He never gives us any easy answers, does he?
No, no, he doesn't.
And then adding to this sense of confusion, I think, is Kay's encounter with the painter, Tittarelli. He's introduced to Tittarelli by a well-meaning manufacturer, and Tittarelli claims, to have these connections within the court. He even paints portraits of judges. But his studio is described as this oppressive, airless space. It's almost like a reflection of Kay's growing, claustrophobia, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and what's so striking is that despite these supposed connections, right, that Tittarelli has, his advice, it's vague and ultimately unhelpful.
Mm.
And Kay is so desperate, I think, for answers at this point that he's willing to cling to even the faintest glimmer of hope. But Tittarelli, just like Hold, he represents another dead end in this frustrating search for justice and meaning and understanding.
Yeah, it's like every path he takes just leads him to another dead end, another locked door, essentially.
Exactly.
There's one scene in particular, and it's pretty brutal, but it really stayed with me. And it's the whipping scene. Kay, he discovers these two policemen,
Yeah.
and they're being flogged in the storage room.
Oh.
And the graphic detail that Kafka uses, it's incredibly disturbing.
Yeah. No, it's meant to be, right? I mean, I think it's meant to shock the reader, and to expose the raw physical violence that underpins this system, right? That's supposedly rational and ordered. I mean, justice within this context, it's not about fairness or due process. It's about power, and that power is often expressed, I think, in a very brutal and dehumanizing way.
Yeah, and Kay's reaction in the scene is so complex. I mean, he initially wants to intervene. He wants to stop the brutality, but ultimately he retreats. He retreats out of fear for his own safety.
Right, and it highlights, I think, the real moral dilemma at the heart of the novel. It's this question of how do you resist a system, that punishes those who dare to question it, and Kay's decision, to protect himself. Well, it's totally understandable. It also reveals his own complicity, I think, in perpetuating, this cycle of injustice.
Right, because by not doing anything, he's essentially allowing it to continue, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's a difficult question. There's no easy answers here. I mean, do you think Kafka is suggesting that resistance is ultimately futile? Like, is there no point in even trying?
I don't think it's that simple. I think Kay's struggle, even in the face of what seems like, inevitable defeat, it represents, I think, a form of defiance in itself.
Mm-hmm.
His refusal to accept the charges against him, his relentless questioning. They keep the system from completely swallowing him whole.
Right. So it's almost like even though he knows he can't win, he's still going to keep fighting because
Right.
that's the only way to maintain some sense of self, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings us, I think, to a really pivotal moment in the excerpts that you provided. And it's Kay's encounter with the prison chaplain in the cathedral, and the chaplain, he tells Kay this really enigmatic parable, the story of the man from the country who seeks entry to the law, but he's continually thwarted by this doorkeeper.
Right.
And the man, he spends his entire life waiting, never actually gaining access, and ultimately he dies on the steps, just outside the door to the law.
Yeah.
What do you think, what do you think Kafka is trying to convey with this parable? I mean, it's so open to interpretation, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And that's, of course, that's what makes Kafka so fascinating. I mean, the man, he's never explicitly denied entry, right? But he's also never encouraged to enter.
Mm.
It's like the door was meant for him, the chaplain says, but he was never ready.
Right. It's like it was always there, but he just never made that final step, I guess. Yeah. I mean, is this a commentary on the passivity, of those who are seeking justice?
Yeah.
Or is it more about the idea that the system itself is designed to exclude and frustrate?
I think it's possibly both of those things.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the parable, I think it operates on such a symbolic level that it forces us, I think, to question the very nature of justice, the power dynamics that control access.
Yeah.
And the role of the individual within these systems.
It's like one of those stories that you hear and then you can't stop thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It just lingers in your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a haunting story that lingers long after you finish reading it, I think, and it makes you wonder, if the search for justice is ultimately futile. Like,
Yeah.
is it a hopeless pursuit within a system that's designed to keep you on the outside, to never let you in. It's a troubling thought, but I think it's one that Kafka forces us to confront.
And that's the brilliance, right, of Kafka, isn't it? Like he never gives you, the easy answers. He presents us with these potent symbols and these scenarios that are just, so ambiguous. And it's up to us really to kind of figure out like what it all means,
Yeah. It definitely encourages active reading. I mean, you can't just passively consume this,
Right.
You're constantly questioning and trying to piece together, all the pieces of the puzzle, but they never quite fit, do they?
No, and that's precisely what makes the trial, I think, so unsettling, but also so compelling. It mirrors, I think, the uncertainty, the ambiguity that we all experience in our own lives.
Yeah.
Where we often find ourselves caught in these systems and these situations that we just don't fully understand.
Right. It's like life itself is this kind of Kafka-esque trial. In a way.
Yeah.
Speaking of systems, one thing that I'm fascinated by is how Kafka portrays the court officials. I mean, they're so strange and unhelpful. They're almost like caricatures, almost like cartoons of real world bureaucrats.
Yeah, and Kafka, he was a master of satire, and he uses it, I think, just brilliantly here to kind of expose the absurdity, the inherent absurdity, I think, of these systems that are supposedly rational. I mean, the officials that Kay encounters, they're petty. They're more concerned with appearances and procedure than with actual justice and fairness.
Yeah. It's all about following the rules. Even if the rules themselves are meaningless.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's that scene where Kay visits the court offices, and it's described as this labyrinthine attic, with these dimly lit rooms and these endless corridors, and he sees all these other accused people, and they're just milling about, waiting for their cases to be heard.
Right, and the way that Kafka describes these individuals, I think, is really key. He talks about how they're dressed carelessly, their backs are bowed, their knees are bent. They almost resemble beggars.
Yeah, it's like they've already been defeated, even before their trials even begin. They've lost their individuality, their dignity almost.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think Kafka is really capturing, how these bureaucratic processes, these systems, can strip individuals of their agency, and they leave them feeling powerless and dehumanized.
It's like the system itself is designed to break you, before you even have a chance to defend yourself.
Right.
And then there's Kay's interaction with the court usher, this seemingly insignificant figure, but he represents the lowest rung, I guess, of this bureaucratic ladder.
Right. And even the usher, who himself, I think, is a victim of this system.
Yeah.
He finds, a kind of twisted sort of satisfaction, I think, in wielding, what little power he has, over the accused. It's just another example, I think, of the absurdity
Mhm.
the whole situation.
Yeah, it's like everyone is complicit in a way.
Exactly.
One of the most disturbing scenes I think in the excerpts that you provided is when Kay stumbles upon, those two policemen and they're being whipped in a storage room.
Right. Yeah. And it's a shocking reminder, I think, of the violence that lurks beneath the surface, of this system that is supposedly rational and ordered. The flogging, it's not about justice. It's not about correction,
Yeah.
It's about the raw exertion of power.
Yeah, it's like a display of just pure like brute force.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Kay's reaction, it's so telling, He initially wants to intervene, right? He wants to stop the brutality, but ultimately he retreats, He retreats out of fear for his own safety.
Right. And it highlights, the moral dilemma, I think, that's at the heart of the novel. It's this question of how do you resist a system that punishes those who dare to question it, and Kay's decision to protect himself. While it's understandable, it also reveals, I think, his own complicity in perpetuating this cycle of injustice.
Right. It's like he's caught between, his own sense of morality, I guess, and his own, self-preservation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough position to be in. I mean, do you think, is Kafka suggesting that resistance is ultimately futile?
I don't I don't think so. I think Kay's struggle, even in the face of what seems like inevitable defeat, it represents, I think, a form of defiance, in itself. His refusal to accept the charges against him, his relentless questioning, they keep the system from completely swallowing him whole.
So it's not necessarily about like winning or losing, It's
Sure.
about like not letting the system completely like crush your spirit.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that brings us to, I think, Kay's relationships with the other characters in the novel. And specifically I'm thinking about, his uncle and the lawyer, Hold.
Right. Yeah. I think both the uncle and Hold, they represent different ways, I think, of navigating this system. The uncle, he embodies those traditional, kind of bourgeois values of respectability and social order, and he's mortified, I think, by the very idea of Kay, being accused of a crime. He's more concerned with appearances, I think, than with Kay's actual like well-being.
Yeah, it's like he can't even imagine like the possibility of challenging the system itself. He just accepts its authority, and he thinks that the only way to deal with it is to play by its rules.
Exactly. And then you have Hold, right?
Yeah.
Who represents this more cynical and perhaps even, opportunistic approach. He understands the intricacies of the legal system, but he's also, I think, very aware of its limitation.
Yeah, he's a really complex character. On the one hand, he seems to be offering Kay, genuine advice and support, but then on the other hand, there's this sense that he's profiting, from Kay's predicament, and that he's kind of drawing him further into this web of legal proceedings with no real guarantee of success.
Right. And it's like, he's this guide, right, through this labyrinthine world,
Hmm.
but he's a guide who might have ulterior motives, and again, Kafka doesn't give us the easy answers here. Like,
Sure.
is Hold a genuine advocate for Kay, or is he just another manipulator within this
Yeah.
system?
It's like we never really know like whose side he's on.
Exactly.
Yeah. I also find Kay's relationships with women in the novel really fascinating. There's his landlady, Mrs. Grubach, who, seems to represent a kind of like maternal figure, She's concerned for Kay's welfare, but she's also like somewhat intimidated, I think, by the legal proceedings.
Right, and she's clearly sympathetic, to Kay, but she's also afraid, being implicated, I think, in his predicament. It's as if even simple, human connection is tainted, by this fear and paranoia that pervades the novel.
Yeah, it's like nobody can like escape the reach of the court, you know. And then there's Miss Bursner, the young woman who rents a room in the same building as Kay, and their interactions, they're charged with this strange mix, I think, of attraction and power dynamics. Kay is clearly drawn to her, but there's also this sense that he's trying to assert control over her, especially after his arrest.
Right, and it's almost as if he sees, women as both a source of comfort and a potential threat,
Yeah.
and his relationships with them, I think they kind of mirror the larger themes of power and control that dominate the novel.
Right, because he feels so powerless, in his dealings with the court, that he's trying to find like some sense of power, I guess, in his personal relationships.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have Leanie, the lawyer holds nurse, and she's another, fascinatingly ambiguous character.
Yeah, Lenny is interesting because she recognizes Kay's vulnerability, and she uses it, I think, to her advantage. She's attracted to him, but she also seems to enjoy, the power that she has over him.
Yeah, it's a really complex dynamic. It's a mix of genuine care and manipulation. And it makes me think about how often those in positions of power, even seemingly minor positions like Lenny's, how
Mhm.
they can kind of exploit the vulnerability of those who are caught in these systems.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point, I think. Because Kafka is showing us how power operates, not just in these grand halls of justice, right, but in the everyday interactions, between individuals.
Right. It's like power is everywhere.
Yeah,
It's in the very fabric of society.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this man, Joseph K, who starts out as a seemingly ordinary, individual, but then he gets swept up in this legal nightmare, and he tries to fight back. He tries to understand, the charges against him. He tries to assert some control, over his own fate. But the system is just relentless. It's chipping away at his sanity, his dignity, his very sense of self.
Right. And through Kay's struggle, I think Kafka is really forcing us to confront, our own anxieties, about arbitrary power, our own vulnerability to these forces that often operate, beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up a mirror, to society and to ourselves, and what we see is not always pretty.
Right.
Yeah, it's a story that raises more questions, I think, than it answers. I mean,
Mhm.
what is the nature of justice? How do we navigate systems of power that seem designed to trap us? And is there any hope, for individual agency, in a world that often feels, absurd and meaningless?
Right. Yeah. And I think those are questions that we're still grappling with, today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not a light read by any means, but I keep coming back to that feeling that you were talking about before, that feeling of being trapped, of running in circles, and Kafka just captures it so brilliantly, and it makes me wonder if there is any possibility of escape, in the trial. Like, is there any hope for Kay, or is he just doomed from the start?
Yeah, I think that's really the question, right? That haunts the entire novel.
Hmm.
And Kafka, he deliberately leaves it open ended, right? I mean, there are moments, I think, where Kay seems to be, on the verge of a breakthrough. Like he's going to find some clarity, some resolution, but then the system just pulls him back in, deeper into this web of just absurdity.
Right. It's like he's constantly searching for an exit, but that exit might not even exist,
Right.
And one thing that I was struck by was how his encounters with women, like his landlady, Mrs. Grubach, or the mysterious Miss Bursner, how those encounters seem to reflect, this kind of like search for connection, for meaning, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the women in the trial, they really represent different facets of Kay's struggle. Mrs. Gruback, I think she embodies this kind of like maternal concern, this longing for stability, for normalcy, that Kay just can't access anymore.
Right, and she's clearly sympathetic to him, but she's also afraid of being, implicated in his predicament. It's like it's almost as if even simple human connection is tainted by this fear, this paranoia that permeates the entire, world of the novel.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have Miss Bursner, right, who represents something more elusive, more alluring, and Kay is clearly drawn to her, but their relationship is marked by this really strange, I think, power dynamic.
Right. It's like he's almost trying to assert control over her, like perhaps as a way of compensating, for his own sense of powerlessness, within the legal system.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And his attempts, they ultimately backfire, and they just push her further away.
Yeah.
It's even in his personal relationships.
Yeah.
Kay just can't escape these patterns of domination and manipulation that seem to define the world around him. Right. And then of course you have Leanie,
Right.
the lawyer Holds nurse, and she's such a fascinatingly ambiguous character, Yeah. Leanie is really interesting because she recognizes Kay's vulnerability, and she uses it, I think, to her advantage. She's attracted to him, but she also seems to enjoy the power, that she has over him.
Yeah, it's a very complex dynamic. It's like a mix of genuine care but also manipulation. And it makes me think about how often those who are in positions of power, even seemingly minor positions like Leanie's, how they can exploit the vulnerability of those who are caught in these systems, in these situations.
Right, and that's such a crucial point, I think, because Kafka is showing us how power operates not just in these grand halls of justice, but also in the everyday interactions between people.
Right. So it's like power is everywhere. It's in every aspect of life in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have this man, Joseph K., right, who starts out as this seemingly ordinary individual, but then he gets swept up into this legal nightmare, and he tries to fight back. He tries to understand the charges against him. He tries to assert some control over his own fate, but the system is relentless. It just keeps chipping away, at his sanity, his dignity, his very sense of self.
Right, and through Kay's struggle, I think Kafka is forcing us to confront our own anxieties.
Yeah.
About arbitrary power, or about our own vulnerability. To these forces that operate beyond our comprehension.
Right, and it's a story that raises more questions than it answers. Like, what is the nature of justice? How do we navigate systems of power that seem designed to trap us? And is there any hope for individual agency in a world that often feels absurd and meaningless?
Right, and I think those are questions that we are all still grappling with today.
Absolutely. This has been such an incredible deep dive into the world of Kafka's The Trial. It's a challenging work, but it's also incredibly rewarding, I think. It forces us to really think deeply about the world around us, about the systems that we navigate every day, and about our own place within those systems.
Yeah, and we encourage you to, revisit the excerpts that you provided, and to grapple with these questions yourself. What resonates with you most about Kay's journey? What does the trial reveal about the complexities of human existence, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels, absurd and unjust? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah. And on that note, that's a wrap on our deep dive. Until next time.